So I mentioned in a previous episode that during my gap year, I ended up reading an unproduced screenplay called The Dancer Upstairs. Actually, before we go any further, I should perhaps explain what the story is. It takes place in New York, in the present day. I suppose genre-wise, it could be described as a psychological thriller. The main character is called Frank. He's still haunted by the rape and murder of his mother that he witnessed when he was a child. It's never actually named as such, but it's heavily implied that he has some form of PTSD. He gradually befriends a neighbour in the building who is referred to only as the dancer. And it's at this point that a slight film noir element comes into play. Because the dancer, it turns out, is kind of a femme fatale, with Frank being the hapless, compromised individual that she manipulates into doing her bidding. There are several murders that happen as a result of this. People that the dancer sees as a nuisance, or they get in her way somehow. Now I'm going to stop there because I don't want to spoil the ending. That would be a huge injustice to whoever eventually makes this. So it was around spring 2013 when I decided to make an attempt to try and get it made. I was told by several people that if I wanted potential financiers and distributors to take me seriously, then I needed to get a producer involved. And so, to this end, I placed an ad on Mandy. There were a number of people who responded, but one person in particular stood out above the others. A chap named Dan Tollcross. And after some back and forth via email, we arranged to meet up and talk further. We'd originally planned to meet at Acosta, but Dan showed up slightly late, and the next thing I know we were sitting in the World's End. So it turns out that Dan had given this chap, whose name was UC, my email address and told me that he'd be in touch to talk further.
Three weeks later.
Now the ultimate is the ultimate
So I actually ended up not going to this meeting. I don't remember why now, admittedly, but it didn't seem to make too much of a difference either way. I should say at this point that I never actually met UC in person throughout all of this. We only ever spoke via email. But somewhat naively, I thought I was going on a nice trip to Monaco. I went down to London on the 3rd, which also happens to be my birthday. So I spent a good chunk of my 27th sitting in a travel lodge, like a lemon. But needs must, I thought. I sent UC an email letting him know that I'd arrived at my hotel. And this was his reply. I'd be lying if I said I wasn't a bit annoyed about that. But he did keep his word. Sort of. So we thought we'd finally entered the home stretch, at last. So this I did end up going to. We met up with him at the Curzon Cinema in Soho, as well as a young woman called Natasha. And after some relatively innocuous banter, we went on to our next port of call. So it was at this point that Dan and I decided to take off. Or at least that's what I thought, until I got a terse email from UC the next morning. Yeah, so it turns out that Natasha was a hooker. It seems really obvious now, looking back, but somehow I completely missed that at the time. And so she'd then stolen his phone and ran off with it. We tried to explain to him, as tactfully as we could, that we didn't mind being hospitable towards his brother, taking him out and keeping him company and whatnot. But we drew the line at delivering ransoms to hookers. And after that, it was another week before we heard from him again. And that was that.